Okay, so I'm doing this Saturn in Aquarius web class. In this web class, we're going to talk about the 10 biggest shifts for you based on your sign of Saturn moving through Aquarius for the next couple years. We're going to go through a lot of different ways of measuring Saturn and really understanding the transit in much more detail than you might be used to because there's a lot of sort of strange information. Some of it is good. A lot of times it's incomplete or it's sensationalized or it's creating fear unnecessarily. And I'll tell you, I'm teaching this class from the point of view of someone who has been doing more than a couple hundred paid readings a year for close to 20 years. I've written two books. They're both back there. I have a couple more on the way that are getting finished. And thousands of hours of classes and thousands of students, and everything I teach has been tested for literally close to 2 decades, if not more than that, when you consider when I was studying. So I'm just saying this because you have to be careful with where you're getting your information these days, and I'm going to be making that clear, particularly when we get into things like Saturn and these scary energies that everybody is afraid of. And again, you might be afraid of it because you've heard, some are astrologers, some are just people who have taken a few classes. They're not really astrologers. They might call themselves that, but that's not really what they do for a living. Again, and I'm not trying to be mean about that, but it's just a fact that there's so much bad information these days or very shallow information. So I'm going to talk about a lot of those things today. I'm going to talk about the transit of Saturn through Aquarius, what it means for your rising sign, like I said. And Saturn's evolution as it moves from Capricorn into Aquarius. There's actually a shift, and what does that mean for us individually and collectively? And again, Saturn will also be casting aspects on different signs. Again, this is very important, hardly ever talked about, if ever. You just don't hear this, I know, because I'm one of the only ones who talks about it, and who has made a big point of this in my practice. You might hear about a thing called sati sati, which tends to terrify everybody, and it's very indiscriminately used and discussed. And I'm going to show you how to understand that in much greater detail today as well. So again, all of these things will help you live a life that's more in line with positive health and career and relationships. There's more of that in the when we get into each of the 12 signs. But again, what does it mean when Saturn goes over any of your natal planets? What does just the transit mean itself? Like if you have any planets in Aquarius, again, what about the dreaded sati sati? How can you really look at that? If you don't know what that is, I'll explain it to you. But it's definitely one of those things where already people are starting to get, Saturn's moving. Now my sati sati has started because I have moon in Pisces and da 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 da. And people get all attached to this thing that really they don't understand. I've done a lot of updates recently about the shift from these planets out of Capricorn. I'm sorry, the shift of Saturn from Capricorn into Aquarius is to really bring us the knowledge and wisdom of the things that we need to understand, not just believe in, arbitrarily, but really understand them. And when we don't understand the things we believe, we can get into superstitious things. Again, there's a song by Stevie Wonder. It's called Superstition. When you believe in things you don't understand, superstition ain't the way. You know, you're going to suffer. That's what he says. So a lot of people suffer with bad astrological knowledge. And so I'm going to be talking about that and clarifying a lot of those things. And it's not to disparage anyone or say that anyone is, a bad person or anything because they, don't have the experience. People are all trying to help each other, but it's very easy to mislead and to scare people or to, do those kinds of things just because we're trying to help or because we've heard this sort of consensus. So I'm going to be talking about a lot of those things. Now, I also want to let people know if you're interested, because this is a really good time. You could go to samsreadings.com and actually get a 30-minute tune-up here at the beginning of 2023. It's a great time to actually do that with the big shift of Saturn for the next couple years. We also have big shifts of Jupiter coming up in April. And other things. So it's a big year ahead. If you did want to get a tune up 30-minute reading where I just look at your chart, explain how these transits are going to happen, like the transits that you're going to see today and your dashas and whatnot, you can go there, samsreadings.com. There's a link here. So first we got to say, what is Saturn? We're going to talk about Saturn in Aquarius. Again, this is one of the things we talk about these things in such a shallow way, or at least so many do. We take for granted that we even know what we're talking about. Well, Saturn is the pressure of time and all that goes with it, which means not wasting time. What did the past mean? What does the future hold? How can I be present right now? So that's a lot. Also, this leads to things like regrets, redemption, loss, commitment, guilt, shame, fear. These are heavy words. I'm just kind of putting them out there. I'm going to contextualize them in a minute. But these things also lead to hard work and effort toward the things that are worth sacrificing for and serving, right? Like all the great things that happen in your life is because you've worked hard. You didn't turn away from the hard work, even though it was difficult. Why? Because that thing was worth serving. Think, for instance, of your children or your the work that you're called to do, like your real calling, how hard you'll work for that and be of service to it, right? These are great Saturn qualities, and which also leads us to getting outside of our comfort zone and really committing to something. For example, like a relationship, committing to another person. It's one of the hardest things we'll do because it's difficult, right? But we have to. But if we love enough, then we will serve. But many times, again, all of these things sounds a little flowery and rosy, but the reason we do these things is because we have to look deep within our heart and soul. Think of the relationships that you've had where you've been put in this kind of these sort of inflection points where there's pressure. Again, think of if Saturn is anything, it's just pressure, the pressure of time. What is pressure and what is time? Why do we feel pressure? Well, because something happens and we have to then decide when we get this pressure, is this thing worth deepening my commitment to it? Or is it too much work and I have to let it go because I only have so much time? And what do I want to spend my time on? This thing or something else? In the present, that's often how we experience Saturn, as this pressure of external circumstances that force us to commit to one thing or another. And we have to commit based on what we love, which isn't always the easiest thing. In fact, it's usually not the easiest thing. What we want to serve, what's worth working hard for, is usually not the thing that makes us happiest in the moment, because it's often a challenge and it's something that we have to look deep inside of ourself in order to align with. Because again, the other thing about time is we're stuck in a certain time cycle, because those things that we're trying to commit to bring about are going to be a reflection of our values, which also came from the past. And that's why I say, what did the past mean? And in particular, those mistakes that you've made, those regrets that you have, the mistakes other people made. Are you still angry at them? Do you still feel guilty about certain things you did? Do you guilt trip others because you're still hanging on to what they did to you? Again, so we have to have a boundary because we want to feel protected. But is that boundary something that also cuts us off from the joy of life? So Saturn brings in all of these big issues. And again, we're stuck between the past and the future often, trying to be present. And all of these things have to do with Saturn, because he's that energy of the past that can be burdening us and making us fearful of making a mistake, repeating a mistake, getting outside of our comfort zone. We Because we might look embarrassed. We All of these sort of separative things where we feel separate, but yet we have to get outside of that in order to actually do anything great in our life. So eventually, that burden of the past and all of those past fears can be let go of in the present so that we can act with more autonomy and full commitment around these things. So think about those concepts when you think about Saturn. That's really what Saturn is, that pressure of time where the past isn't such a burden, where we've learned from the past, we've let go of the punishment, of the aggravation, and of the hurt that we're still blaming others for and still guilt tripping others for. Maybe you're not actually guilt tripping your father or mother who did this thing to you when you were a kid, but if you're still angry about it, you're guilt tripping other people for it, right? You're projecting. So, forgiveness, letting go of the past, not having it loom over everything we're doing so that we're fearful and we're triggered and all of those things. That's really what Saturn brings. And as he's moving through the sky, like he's moving into Aquarius now, this will impact the world, all of us collectively, which I'm going to talk about in a bit, but also each individual, particularly if you have any planets in Aquarius and in other positions as well. But I also want to make this clear because as I'm a Vedic astrologer, and even the sign of Aquarius is very misunderstood and talked about in quite a strange way. Um, Aquarius is actually a Western astrology sign. It's um, the same area of space is called Kumbha Rashi, which is the Indian sidereal name of that section of sky, and the symbols are very different. The Western astrology sign of Aquarius is this kind of quirky, eccentric nature. It's ruled by Uranus. It's symbolized usually by like this sort of long-haired lady pouring water, like a Lady Godiva type of figure. Aquarius, it almost looks like Venus pouring water. And it's even thought to be, many people think it's a water sign. Frankly, even in Vedic astrology, people think it's water because all of this pouring of water out of a pot. Okay, I want you to understand that that's Western astrology. Okay, if you want to do Vedic astrology, you need to learn what Kumbha is and how it's different than Aquarius, and you need to learn the symbol correctly. All right, and you have to learn that Saturn is the ruler, and why Saturn, and how is this different? Because again, I hear so many Vedic astrology students, they start talking, and by the way, even Vedic astrologers say Aquarius, and then they'll be like, quirky, eccentric, and all. This is Western astrology, which is fine. If you're going to say it's Neo-Vedic astrology, that's fine. But per the scriptures and the text, like you see here, there's a reason why it's Kumbha. It's a totally different symbol. In Indian astrology sign, it's not a sort of quirky, futuristic egghead, nutty professor sort of energy. It's actually a humble man. It's ruled by Saturn. It's symbolized by a man holding an empty pot where there's no water in the pot. So the man has the pot and it's empty. You can see here from the Bible of Vedic astrology, you would say Bible, I don't really like that word, but oops, Prashahorasastra, it says the Rashi Kumbha represents a man holding a pot. Its complexion is deep brown. It has a medium build, is biped Rashi, is very strong in daytime. It resorts to deep water and is airy. It's an airy sign. It rises with its head and is tamasic. It rules Sudras, or workers, laborers, the fourth Varna, and the western direction, Lord Shani. And the Lord is Shani, Surya, or the sun's offspring. So again, there's a lot here. And he gives a lot of descriptions of the Vedic astrology signs, which again, this is why Vedic astrology is so powerful, because all of these little terms are really loaded. Okay, so Kumbha is ruled by Saturn, like you said, the son of Surya, right? It's airy, right? It's masculine. because air is a masculine element, it's tamasic, which is to protect and to notice stress and difficulty. It has a medium size and it's a human Rashi. He did say the medium part. Where is it? Tamasa rules suited by deep water. It has medium build. Yeah, that's right. I knew it said it there. It has medium build. This is one of the attributes of the signs, and it's also a human um, Rashi, which is it's a person, right? And so again, it's a man. One of the words with Aquarius is humble. It's like a humble man who's been humbled, but not defeated, humbled, but ambitious, motivated, and intellectual because it's airy. So Aquarius is ruled by Saturn, expressing himself in an external way, in a masculine way. The external nature of Saturn brings awareness of time into existence. Once we become aware of the enormity of time, boundaries, structures, and limitations, when they become externalized, we see how the qualities of the smaller self must be let go of. So once we become aware of the enormity of the impact we have, then the smaller self has to be let go of and be like, okay, well, I'm not the most important person here. The larger social structure, the enormity of time, the 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 profound reverence for a universal identity is seen. Um, and so we must concentrate on something bigger in order to grow something bigger in our lives. Culture, politics, the sciences, and other things that are much larger than our individual needs and much longer than our individual lifetime are all related to Aquarius. That's why Aquarius has a humanitarian bent to it as well. So it's humanitarian in the sense that we commit, again, we are committing to humanity, which isn't committing to me as the most important person. Again, Kumbha is opposite Leo or Simha, the lion, opposite of the fierce, individual, powerful lion, is the universal man. It's like the universal man is also a way to understand Kumbha Rashi. And again, he's humbled. Again, it's not quirky, eccentric. It's a very scientific sign, very much about progress, those kinds of things, but not in some quirky individual way. It's in a humble way, which is looking to find the thing to serve. Where can I be of service? What's bigger than me? What transcends me? And in many ways, the humbling quality of Aquarius, it's both empowering and quite disempowering on an individual level. One of the things that Aquarius people, like if that's the rising sign or the moon there or any planets there, is they can have a hard time. Let's say that it's the ascendant, like their identity revolves around that sign. They negate their own power a lot, but then they also have a shadow relationship with other people's power. So they'll get into power struggles after humbling themselves and then get this sort of frustration around trying to get their self-respect or dignity back in their mind. So the issue, and again, this is the nature of Saturn, is to be humbled, is to feel like we're not powerful, and to feel the limitations of things, to feel how, again, all those things that were said in the past are true, and like we can be burdened by that with Saturn as the ruler. But it's externalized though, and it's humanitized or humanized, I should say, and universalized. This is also the nature of Aquarius, is that universal consciousness, those universal ideas, again, because it's an air sign. And the symbol of the empty pot is very interesting because it's that empty, there could be a kind of numbing emptiness in Aquarius. Again, I'm not just talking about people who are Aquarius, but the sign itself can have a kind of numbing um, capacity to it where we could feel kind of numb and disconnected from the heart. Again, it's ruled by Saturn, which is already the planet of compartmentalizing our feelings and turning off our feelings and just kind of locking that thing down because it's too painful. Saturn allows us to do that. And at times it's a very useful skill. If you're in a concentration camp or you're in some terrible situation where you don't have time to sit there and feel how terrible this is, we can just sort of compartmentalize that to try to survive. This is Saturn, it's a survival instinct. So Aquarius can just be where there's too much of that just kind of survival mode, and that's also the tamasic nature. Um, but on a higher level, as we spiral upward, as it evolves, spiraling upward, that sort of emotional emptiness, um, again, can also lead to enormous service. But there's always that kind of back and forth. Saturn is opposite the sun and the moon. He rules signs that are opposite the sun and the moon, which are Leo and Capricorn. So he's kind of opposite the sun and the moon, which is that good feeling and that vibrant, I'm alive. Saturn is like, yeah, and one day I'm going to be dead. So here's what I say to your, I'm alive and feeling good about it, which is the sun and the moon is I'm alive and I feel great about it. The Saturn's like, yeah, and one day you won't be. You feel good about that? How good does that feel? So it's this evolution from Capricorn to Aquarius. Capricorn is where we have to deal with that nature of Saturn internally and psychologically and emotionally. And we've all just been through that since early 2020. We're coming out of the COVID era. And I'm not just saying COVID, the disease that came in, but the whole consciousness that how the world changed since then. All of the emotional pressure and stress and heaviness and fear and conspiracy around the fear. And again, I'm not judging any of it. Absolutely, there's so much misinformation and confusion, whether it was all intentional or not, or whatever. Just the whole kind of drama that has ensued since that time. A lot of this Capricorn internalized Saturn stress, fear, worry, sort of hunker down in our bunker, a sort of bunker mentality. This shift of Saturn into Aquarius is taking us out of that bunker mentality into the open sky again, you would say. You want to think about that. And I see this as very positive in this context, regardless of anything else that happens. If you have Sati or you have other planet there, again, that's one thing. And you can make it all about yourself and your own chart and your own thing. But we also, on a collective level, this is a great shift away from all of that sort of hunkering down, trying to survive mentality that we've all been kind of feeling since early 2020, to where we're now starting to see past that and even see those who want to keep us invested in all that fearful stuff also are being revealed. It's like, yeah, you seem to want to keep bringing everything back to this, the good old days when we were terrified, and reminding us of lockdowns, or I don't know, whatever it might be. There are people that don't want to even let the fear and paranoia go, because a lot of people got famous and wealthy and all off of that. So there's great opportunities to move beyond the polarizing fear that has been used against the normal people, which would be us. So much fear has been weaponized to help the powerful. If you want to look at it in a universal way, those who are in power love to see the masses like fearful and pointing fingers at each other and all this kind of stuff. And a big opportunity of Saturn moving into Aquarius is to recognize this and to get back to something that's more humane, where regardless of this sort of political figure, cult, ideology, we can come together and see, look, we're all in it together. And it could mean that there's even some sort of collective, difficulties, financial or whatnot, that's going to force us to come together and work together. But I want you to understand this difference between Kumbha, this what we would call Aquarius in Vedic astrology. It's very different than the quirky Aquarius in Western astrology. Okay, it's Saturn. It's humbled. It's willing to put aside their feelings in order to bring about the new world. I mean, imagine if you knew that you could cure the world of the worst thing that you could imagine, if only, and all you need to do is just not care about how you feel for 10 years. Forget about how you feel for 10 years and do this thing, and you're going to, let's say, cure the world of cancer or whatever it might be. It's not a bad it's not a bad trade-off. Saturn would allow you to do that. So think of that kind of sacrifice and how we put aside our needs for the collective good and that capacity that we all have. Um, so this is the nature of the highest nature of Aquarius. In the lowest sense, like I said, we have to be careful with um, shadow confidence issues and things like that, where we can have resentments. So the previous transit of Saturn through Aquarius, which was March 5th, 1993 to June 1995, is quite interesting. So I'll just read this list. It's quite fascinating. It was here in the US, it was Bill Clinton's first term. He had just been elected and he was inaugurated. It was at the end of January of 1993, but it was right before that long cycle. So if you remember that time, and also the Republican, by the time this was over, the Republicans also had that contract with America. And it was really the birth of modern cutthroat politics in America with Newt Gingrich and his kind of slash and burn, zero compromise approach. Before that, it definitely was nowhere near as slash and burn cutthroat as politics is now. And again, those of us who lived through it, I remember when Republicans and Democrats were always compromising for the good of the country and what they could get done. This period of time, especially with Newt Gingrich and the Republicans' contract with America and all this, he came in and kind of overran the old Republicans. People who didn't live through it don't realize how much Republicans, how just annihilated Bill Clinton was when he was in the 8 years of Bill Clinton. He was just ripped into constantly by the Republicans and especially Newt Gingrich. But anyway, whole that was the beginning of an era of vicious politics that started then, and then it moved throughout the time since then. But so again, Saturn's coming back to Aquarius. Again, notice these themes of politics, humanity, progress, larger themes, um, for better or worse. The first World Trade Center bombing happened right before, on February 26th, right before Saturn moved into Aquarius. But again, it was like a week before. This was like Saturn was like 29.34 or something using Lahiri Ayanamsha. So it was literally right as Saturn was moving into Aquarius. But again, this was the first bombing, World Trade Center bombing. I remember this. I was in France at the time because I came back from France after this, and right after that happened, and customs was terrible. That was in 1993. Maastricht Treaty, the EU was established. Again, I remember this time very well. I was in Europe when the Maastricht Treaty was getting ratified, or when it was getting, and that's what establishes the European Union. So essentially, the European Union started last time Saturn went through Aquarius. The EU, think of that now. The other thing, NAFTA, the free trade agreement, the North American Free Trade Agreement happened. Again, people don't know how significant that was. That was a free trade agreement that, well, Trump said he just renegotiated the whole thing when he was president, but it was the prevailing trade agreement that started to ship jobs out of America to Mexico and other things like that. It was a huge multinational trade agreement that has, there's a lot of opinions about it, but definitely the change of the manufacturing sector in America started with NAFTA, free trade agreement. So again, these are huge things. The EU established the European Union, NAFTA, this free trade agreement, which really changed a lot of economic and especially commerce. You see all these are international things that are huge. World Trade Center bombing, think of the implications that had. The Serb-Croat Bosnian War started right at this time. Yugoslavian War dominated this period where NATO also got involved and whatnot. Waco and the Branch Davidians happened like April of 1993. Again, David Koresh and that fire, that whole thing. The Brady handgun law was signed into law, which was probably the most comprehensive handgun law ever. Clinton Yeltsin signed the Kremlin Accords, which also dismantled the Ukrainian nukes. So the Ukrainian the agreement that was made where the Ukrainians agreed to give up their nuclear weapons for the protection, in order to be protected by the West, that was forged at this time when Clinton and Yeltsin signed the Kremlin Accords. Thought this was interesting. Schindler's List was the best picture in 1993. I say this because of all the Jewish themes. Again, I remember this time, and it was a lot of feeling of progress in the world at this time, especially, by the way, Clinton getting elected. This was after 12 years of Republicans in America, 12 years of hardcore conservatism after the 70s. Then you had Ronald Reagan from 1980, 1992 to George Bush. So when Bill Clinton was elected 1992 and he was inaugurated in 1993, it was like this sudden wave of enthusiasm and youth and hope. And I lived it. I remember. At least it wasn't a Reagan Bush Republican conservative government in America. So it was definitely a wave of hope at that time. And you can see these other things that happen. I just wanted to put that into context as well. But Kurt Cobain, suicide. So Nirvana hit a couple years earlier, and this was Kurt Cobain's suicide. It was in '94. The Channel opens, which is from France to Great Britain. The tunnel that goes under the North Sea. Is it? What is it's not North Sea. I don't know. I don't remember that body of water. English Channel, maybe. Yeah, that's it. Okay. Mandela inaugurated president. Nelson Mandela was inaugurated president in South Africa at this time. Look at all these huge things that happened when Saturn went through Aquarius last time. There was a short-lived ceasefire in the Yugoslav war, but this was one of the terrible things that happened at the time. Was the Yugoslav war broke out at this time. So once Yugoslavia broke up, Serb, Croat, Bosnians, they all went to war, and you had genocide over there. And so here's another big thing. O.J. Simpson, the O.J. Simpson murder, arrest, the Bronco chase, all of that stuff happened when Saturn went into Aquarius. This was 1994. Jeff Bezos founded Amazon. Just interesting fact. He's an OG. Say what you want to about him. He started Amazon in 1994. I remember the internet back then, and it wasn't much. Major League Baseball strike in the U.S., and the World Series was canceled. This is the only time it's ever happened where the World Series was canceled since 1906. That's the only year was 1994. So it was a real anomaly, Major League Baseball strike. And again, think about these Aquarian themes of like larger themes. I mean, again, these are larger events, but feel how the collective is there. And I'm reminded of this just because, the Major League Baseball strike, it's like unions. These are like unions against the company. NAFTA, free trade agreements, are international agreements, which are supposed to uplift people. The thing with NAFTA was it was going to uplift these workers in these other countries, but it was going to ship jobs out of America cheaper, that you could get done cheaper somewhere else, and this whole thing. But it was an international kind of thing. And that's really what Aquarius is, like a futuristic, hard work, and put the nuts and bolts into place for this larger principle. George Foreman wins a heavyweight title again at 45. This is just an interesting one. But again, Saturn, Father Time. This is one of the reasons I thought of it too. Saturn in Aquarius. It was a big thing at the time. George Foreman was 45 years old and won the heavyweight title in boxing, which is crazy. Netscape Navigator, the first web browser, was developed as well. So you see, this was right at the beginning of the internet age and whatnot, and all the very interesting things. So the way I see this now is it's definitely a age. I'm hopeful because of the potential progress. And as much as we want to look at Saturn going through Capricorn as this terrible time, I said once we saw what was going on, and I saw there was COVID and what that was going to mean, I said then that it was going to be, it would make for a lot of progress in a lot of areas, especially helping us get our time back, telecommuting was now going to be an absolute, almost sure thing. So many more people now are telecommuting, only going to offices when they need to. That's one thing. But there was other dangers with, of course, concentrating power into smaller and smaller hands and whatnot. But I see the real potential for this Saturn in Aquarius to really move things to the next level relative to, again, the sort of social contract that we have, making better agreements after seeing the darkness and the garbage that was revealed with Saturn going through Capricorn, and all of the dark, fearful propaganda that we're now really just kind of swimming in. I think Saturn and Aquarius, having shown us a lot of that, is going to help lead us back to something more in line with the collective good. At least that's my hope. And again, I remember the feeling of hope the last time Saturn went through Capricorn, went through Aquarius. Again, I'm an American, but it wasn't just in America, because again, shortly thereafter, they signed the EU. The EU was established. This is a big, hopeful thing. I remember they never thought the EU was going to be able to establish itself. All these countries being able to find a common currency and all this, are like, no way will Europe ever be able to come together around this. And they did when Saturn went into Aquarius, right? The Maastricht Treaty, right? Again, like I said, in America, we had, if you go back and look at Bill and Hillary Clinton, they were youthful. Clinton was 47 or something. Hillary Clinton was young. They were like, okay, like the 60s had taken into the White House. It wasn't World War II generation anymore, Reagan and Bush. It was youth. It was a youthful enthusiasm and a sense of possibility. So, and innovation, even like NAFTA and all that was innovative. Although, again, I'm not going to get into politics here, but um, wound up being a lot more corporate than we thought at the time. Because again, at the time, 93, 94, Bill and Hillary Clinton were very progressive. After they got killed in the 94 midterms and this whole thing with Newt Gingrich and the crash and burn, Bill Clinton went right to the middle, and that's it. That's the last time we had a progressive or someone trying to really do things. He became very corporate and moved the whole Democratic Party to the right. But that's a political discussion. But the Saturn into Aquarius part was like people were trying to really restore some social things that were lost with 12 years of conservatism in America. Now, I want to talk about the Sati Sati issue. If you don't know, Sati Sati is this structure in Vedic astrology. It's not in any of the texts or anything. It's something that is talked about, where 7.5 years of Saturn difficulty, when it gets in signs adjacent to your natal moon, either before the natal moon, with the natal moon, or after the natal moon. It's said to be 7.5 years of difficulty, and you just, I mean, that's, you just have to sort of gut it out. And I put this here because it says Pisces and Capricorn moon people, you can relax. So if Saturn is here in Aquarius and you don't have any planet there, particularly for people who have the moon in Pisces, because if people have the moon in Pisces, they're being told your Sati Sati is beginning now, because Saturn is in the sign before your moon. So the 7.5 years is starting. Even if you don't have any planets there or any planets after. And I'm saying, don't listen to that. Unless you have a planet in Aquarius, you do not have to worry about Sati Sati once Saturn enters Aquarius. 7.5 years of suffering of Sati Sati is the most overhyped of all Vedic astrology placements. By the way, this isn't just my view. And I'm not discounting what happens when Saturn, gets near the moon, but there's so many other things that are relevant. So as you could see here, as it says, Saturn will occupy Aquarius and cast a third house aspect to Aries, a 10th house aspect to Scorpio, and a 7th house aspect to Leo. So particularly if you know your Vedic astrology chart and you have planets in Aries or Leo or Scorpio, they're going to be getting that Saturn aspect, which means Saturn's going to be bringing that concentration and that concentrated effort onto those planets. So I would say, again, for people, especially for the people who have the moon in Pisces, because for the people who have the moon in Pisces, but they have no planets in Aquarius in their natal chart, your sati sati isn't starting, okay? Um, just because there's an empty house and there's an empty sign and it's the sign before your moon. People should pay more attention to any planets in Aries, Leo, or Scorpio because Saturn is going to be bringing his direct aspect there. And those aspects by transit are really, I wouldn't say just as intense, but certainly any aspect is bringing that energy. And the planets aspect as they move through the sky. And so if you have planets in Aries, Leo, or Scorpio, as Saturn is moving through Aquarius and getting close to the exact degrees, he's going to be spreading that influence. Now, what it means is it's bringing that power, all that power I told you earlier. And if you notice, I didn't speak badly of Saturn and act like it was a terrible thing. It's not a terrible thing. It's just an energy. It's just a neutral energy. It's just pressure. How you respond to pressure is completely your choice and why you're here. How you respond to the pressure of having to wake up to just, acting in accordance with things that might not feel good or face things that are, oh, but I don't want to have things be hard. And when we want to stay immature and childish, then Saturn hurts us. It's not Saturn hurts us, our ignorance hurts us. And you want to understand, it's not a cold statement. It means we know the truth of life. You know by now. We all know. And if we want to pretend we don't know, again, this is when the reality of Saturn, which is just the reality of time and the reality of life and the reality of what we're doing around certain things, we feel the reality of that. And the reality is, things that happened from the past or whatever it happened, but how have we processed it? How have we really processed it? Has it made us fearful? Has it made us more compassionate? As such, what are we committed to bringing about? They're the same question. They're parallel tracks that feed into the same river. And, if we're stuck at some point, then that river isn't going to flow into the ocean. If we're still stuck at some place where we want to stay immature, even though we know the past is over and we have to make peace and forgive and be real, because it's not just that things were done to us. We do things to other people too. How much are we making amends for that? How much humility do we have about the mistakes we make, et cetera, right? So it's just that process. That's all. No big deal. You've been dealing with it your whole life. So this is why I also tell astrologers and astrology students and whatnot, don't make astrology stuff so big. People have been dealing with it their whole life. You've been dealing with Saturn doing something your whole life. There's no reason to be scared or anything about it. It's just an energy, your energy, and your greatness, really. So understand these things with more skill. And again, so if you have planet in Aries and Saturn's going to be aspecting it, don't be like, oh God, oh God. And again, I can say the thing I just said to just explain it with a neutral way till I'm blue in the face and people will still be like, okay, well, God, now I feel worried. Now I'm stressed. God, come on. Grow up. Stop doing that. Don't make it that. It's not that. It's like, you know, it's not a big deal. You can handle it. Don't worry. Okay. So, like I have Mars in Leo. Okay. So Mars is going to get aspected. I just had Saturn was going through Capricorn. I have the moon in Libra. So I was just getting Saturn aspecting my moon in Libra for almost a year, back and forth on it. Was it easy? No. But there was a lot of great things that came. I got very focused, very connected to the heart. I felt such deep compassion for many things that happened in the past that I was still kind of holding on to. And was it easy? No, but I'm stronger for it. And I wasn't like praying, God, please stop. Oh God, I'm so scared. Oh God, this is so hard. No, just This is why you need spiritual practices. When you do spiritual practices every day, it normalizes everything. Everything is then put into a normal field of consciousness because you're not now waking up and just going trying to avoid things that make you feel bad all the time. Like life is, how do I not feel bad? Well, if that's the goal, that's going to not it's not very good strategy. So do your meditations and your spiritual practices, and if Saturn is affecting these places for you, he's going to make it easier for you to concentrate if you're willing. If you're not willing, he's going to make it hard until you become willing. And that's really the thing. Because first we feel the pressure, then we're like, oh, we try to, and we might be jumping out of our skin. And then eventually we get tired of that and we're like, okay. And then we're like, this wasn't so bad after all. Why was I so scared? So this is what the sadhisati is. Again, I just have this example. You want to evaluate the term of sadhisati based on Saturn transiting the adjacent signs. If there are planets there, like he just left Capricorn and is moving and moved into Aquarius. For example, in this chart, a person had Mars in Sagittarius, Moon in Capricorn, and Venus in Aquarius. So that 7.5 year cycle would be very lit up because they have all these planets here around the moon. If there are no planets, there'll be no Saturn pressure in that way. So this example, no one has a planet in Aquarius, then you're not going to be feeling that, especially the sadhisati from Pisces or still from Capricorn. Like if you have your moon in Capricorn and you don't have any planet after the moon, then your sadhisati is over. If your moon is in Pisces and there's no planet in Aquarius, your sadhisati hasn't started yet. If you're feeling Saturn pressure, you're feeling it more because of a planet. You're feeling it because of a planet in Scorpio, Leo, or Aries. So just keep that in mind. Now, so yeah, Vedic teachers, please, proceed with caution before sentencing people to 7.5 years of struggles, death, and pain. If there are no planets in the adjacent signs, and yes, even if you think you're helping by telling them to recite the Hanuman Chalisa or wear a horseshoe nail for 7.5 years, if you're being alarmist and then saying, oh, but don't worry, say Hanuman Chalisa, even though this thing isn't really happening because there's nothing going on, then you're not really doing anybody a favor by saying, let me freak you out, but here's how to calm down after I freak you out. But of course, spiritual practices are always great. You should always, anybody who wants to say the Hanuman Chalisa, you could say it whether Saturn is on your moon or not. So that's just what it is. Saturn goes into Aquarius. So again, from each of these different signs, it's going to be different. So if you're Aries person, it's the 11th house. So this is a shift for the next 2.5 years or so of social duty and service. And it's social duty and service because it's Aquarius, and Saturn is the ruler of Aquarius. So it's very powerful to bring these things and to really deliver sort of concentrated effort in this way. So it's really going to be a time for us all to step up and really fulfill our obligations to each other socially and be of service and to perform our duty, as we would say, to each other. And again, there's something sort of quaint about that, especially in America, where we are, and a lot in the Western world. The concept of duty and service isn't something that we talk about so much. We now tend to turn it into something like with the military or something. Thank you for your service and all like that. Well, it's really a job, but we look at it as service because they're, quote, sort of defending the country or whatever. But when people do something, selfless service is a kind of a different thing. You wouldn't be like a job. Maybe it's a thankless job or a job that, and on that count, it may, qualify. But certain types of jobs, especially jobs, I think of real service, selfless service jobs like nurses or school teachers, or again, but these are jobs that we're paid to do. But there's also a sense of duty and purpose for things that are where you feel a calling and causes that are bigger than yourself, like the environment or animal welfare, or again, even just helping the poor, or so many causes where we sacrifice our own identity and personal power, which is the sign of Leo. Leo is where my individuality is very important, and we kind of put that aside in order to do something that's selfless. This is one of the tenets of yoga. You should understand, it's not just one of the tenets of yoga because it's something that's, it's good to do, it's nice, that we should be a good person, so we should do that. No, it's actually called karma yoga, and there's a scientific methodology behind it, and it's that we're very egotistical. In other words, we feel like, whether we admit it or not, that the world's kind of revolving around me. You're sitting there and it's not something that we admit. We're kind of loath to admit this, but it's fundamentally pretty true. We feel our life as the most important thing. Like, well, me, I'm the focal point. Like, I'm the most important thing in my life. By the way, it's what I feel. It's what every individual feels, and it's called the ego in the West. That false self. Everything revolves around that false self, which cuts us off from everything else, because obviously that's not true, and we know it intellectually, but we don't live that way. You live as if you are the center. Your survival, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with that, because you want to survive first, but it gets out of hand. So the reason karma yoga, or selfless service, is so important is because the first thing it does is it breaks that attachment. When you start to serve others and you make them the center of your life, your perspective changes. If you've never done it, you should. You think you have a lot of problems, and then you get out and you start to serve others. And first of all, you stop thinking about your problems because you're actually doing something for others. There's great compassion that arises, particularly because you also see the difficulty others are going through. You see their pain, especially like if you serve like the homeless, or you serve animals, or you literally serve people that can't help themselves, handicapped or elderly, or people who literally need help, and you go help them, you feel great compassion for them, and you feel grateful for what you have. These are huge things, and it's a path of yoga. And I don't just mean it because it's a good thing to do, because it breaks the ego, because it breaks that egoistic attachment. And you immediately feel, again, it's science, it's not a theory. Do it and see what happens. You immediately have more compassion, less complaining about life. You feel more gratitude. These are huge things. So I'm talking about this because Saturn going into Aquarius is a huge shift, where this gratitude, this humility, and this is the greatness of Saturn, because when we suffer, we have compassion and sympathy and empathy for others who suffer, right? And so serving those who suffer, serving the poor, taking care of, those who need help, is a great spiritual lesson of Saturn going through Aquarius. By the way, through Capricorn as well, but through Aquarius, it's much more active, because Saturn is it's not exalted, but it's in its highest position, really, in Aquarius. It's Mula Trikona, where we realize that the time we have on Earth is short, and we want to do something good with it, not just sit there and think about all of our problems. So that's the general interpretation of Saturn in Aquarius, that we're all going to feel in one way or another, right? That calling to something, that and that commitment, which is Saturn, to something bigger than just our own safety, our own problems. Saturn's problems, our own problems. Capricorn, we can get kind of preoccupied, our own power, or whatever it is. So that's the overall interpretation. And then in the 12 signs, it's going to show up in a different way. It's going to influence different areas of life. Now, with an Aries person, because it's the first sign, and Aquarius is the 11th sign, which has that same crossover analog with the house, this gets very strongly reinforced, right? This is a time to really feel the power of service, of not wasting your time, and really living this authentically, like I just said. Everything I just explained for Aries person, it's even double. It's going to be very intense for you to really get there and show up and be of service to others in the way I just described. It also shows an elevation of your ambition and your individual ambition and accomplishments into something more universal. It'll be very good for you, Aries, because you can be quite involved with your own self and your own goals. This elevates them. Taurus, this is very powerful and invigorates your 10th house or your career and your work, and really infuses your work with a renewed purpose and renewed commitment to the things I mentioned, to service, to things bigger than your own comfort level, because you, Taurus, you can get into your own comfort zone very easily and not want to work hard unless, well, what am I going to get? Well, is it going to be too difficult? Is it going to make me happy? Again, Saturn gives you great capacity to sacrifice for things and sacrifice for others, if you know that it's going to bring joy and beauty into their life. Gemini, this is 9th house. Again, also a very powerful placement. Saturn will be the 9th house ruler in the 9th house for you, Gemini. It's really powerful for taking your natural, gifts with speech and flexibility and joy and communication, and really putting them out there for the highest good, for a higher purpose, connecting with those teachings and that wisdom and that higher, for that higher good, for that higher purpose. Very powerful for you, Gemini, to commit to those higher teachings and not just want to enjoy life, because you can get kind of complacent and not want to take things seriously. Wherever Saturn is, you can really take those things seriously, and now in your 9th house, really taking your teaching seriously, and you as a teacher also much more seriously and willing to get out and show up bigger. And Cancer, this is your 8th house, which will bring a lot of capacity to face your fears, to transform your expected fears and pain into something that is more, again, more transcendent, more sort of insightful and penetrating, rather than just trying to avoid the chaos and the things you can't control, or gravitate toward crazy things that are out of control so you can kind of, get into a bad mood and sulk, which Cancer, you can kind of do that as well. Saturn kind of makes you embrace the sadness, transforming all of that into something, again, that's very rich and very soulful, beyond, and that is universal and transcendent socially and personally, and that can benefit your community and all the things I just said. Because all those things I just said about the karma yoga and this and that happens in your 8th house. So it's very transformative for you to transform all of that personal shyness and insecurity into something that shows up as a great, in great benefit to others. So it doesn't just hang out in that emotional space. Leo, this is very much about literally even just being of service to others, being willing to not be the powerful one. And you have great capacity for that as long as you get used to the idea, because Leo, your tendency is to feel yourself to be the powerful one, and you have a very hard time, until you understand it, learning how to compromise and not being the important one who is right and who is, I get to decide and I'm the important one and I'm the center of it all. Once you connect with something bigger and you realize that this smaller identity isn't the real thing, then you're very well equipped to be a powerful light of service and to share the stage, let's say, and enjoy it and have fun with it, because you're always ready to have fun. As long as you understand what's happening, you can have fun with that. And so bringing your naturally empowered and confident nature into something bigger is also very important. For you, Virgo, this is a very creative placement, and it shows your natural ability to be humble and to be of service and to commit and concentrate on things that benefit others. It's very natural for you, as Saturn is a Dharma planet for you. You can tend to, be a great healer in this regard. And this is a great time for not just personal healing, but if you do any kind of healing work in your business, it can be very beneficial, because that sixth house, is about curing illness and overcoming it, and you're very creative when it comes to those things. So this could be quite powerful for you, Virgo. Again, these are cycle. This is a transit that happens for a couple years. Okay, Libra. This is also Saturn is it's perhaps your most important planet. It rules your fourth and fifth house, and it shows again a very empowered, creative time on many levels, where you could be, it could be with children, with other types of creative endeavors, really concentrating, and again with the public, and it shows why you're naturally creative in the public and want to bring joy and happiness to others, and you're willing to work very hard to do that. Very auspicious transit for you, Libra, in that regard, particularly around your heart's desire, creativity, children, any kind of things like books or stuff that you're wanting to work hard on, especially if they serve a larger purpose, will be very empowered. Scorpio, this is going through your fourth house, which has to do with your heart, your emotional life, your feelings, your deeper, those roots of the tree of your life that you need to nurture and water in order to heal those deeper wounds that you may have, Scorpio. To develop that emotional courage, often you look for excuses at times to feel intense and to find, difficulty. So again, you're very good at transforming that emotional pain and stress. And again, Saturn going through your fourth house can show some heaviness, but you'd really benefit from the service and the things I talked about, because you really love holding space for other people's transformation, Scorpio. Very naturally acclimated to that. So this bodes very well for that type of endeavor, to hold space for other people's transformation and whatnot. And Sagittarius, this is going through your third house, which has to do with interests, finding new ways of doing things, questioning your beliefs. You can be quite, at times, sort of, maybe a little bit rigid in your beliefs, and kind of religious about things. But again, Saturn going through the third house is saying, now, wait a minute, instead of just believing these things, how does this really work? And really sort of concentrating your mind on new ways of seeing things. And again, a lot of it comes through getting out and being around others and their values and their beliefs. Again, particularly as it relates to things like service and opportunities to embrace a variety of people, could really open your mind to not just the things that you believe, but really deepen your understanding of them, and maybe to other types of ways of seeing things. But again, what's really driving this is that Saturn in Aquarius is perceiving ourselves as part of a greater whole, right? Not just our own individuality. And again, I go into this in great detail in the written forecast. I mean, in this more in-depth forecast, because I talk more about the house rulerships and whatnot. Like for example, with the Sagittarius, it rules. Saturn rules the second and third house, so I bring that in more. With the Scorpio, it rules the third and fourth house. With Leo, sixth and seventh, so I bring it in a little more depth. But again, these are still very important. Um, Opportunities for growth that you're learning about here. So with Capricorn, this is putting an emphasis on your second house because Saturn is your ruling planet. So again, you're really ruled by that seriousness of Saturn and looking for those things to really commit to and concentrate on. So Saturn has been in your first house, Capricorn. He's now moving on. You're probably both grateful and sorry to see him leave because Saturn is your ruling planet. It's been a time for you to make things simple again, serious. But again, he's ready to move on after a couple years, and you're ready to be like, okay, now let me take that seriousness and open it back up, commit to something more universal and more public and share it now with others and expand my money, my values, my friends. Those are all big second house things. My close circle of friends, my family, earn money, those kinds of things are second house. And Saturn moving there will support that for the next couple years as well. It'll be a good transit for you, Capricorn. As Saturn spending a couple years in your first house is good, and then moving into your second house is also really quite good. Now, Saturn in Aquarius is, of course, if you're an Aquarius person, it is bringing greater commitment in all of these ways, but this is, your identity revolves around this, sense of service and a dignified humility, which is not humiliation. The thing that Aquarius people you can struggle with is humility without feeling humiliated, because you can tend to not feel empowered yourself. So having Saturn just gone through your 12th house and now coming into your first house will be like, okay, hopefully you've been really reflecting on the power of Saturn. And now it comes into your first house and you're like, okay, now I get this sort of dignified humility that's very simple and practical and with great compassion and empathy for others. Saturn is really what makes us empathize with others and have a very sensitive, soft spot for those who suffer and who are in pain. And so for you, Aquarius, you have this naturally. You just have to be careful not to focus too much on your own heaviness and suffering and pain and insecurity. So this will be a time, again, to serve, to commit to those things that are very natural for you. And for Pisces, this is happening in your 12th house where Saturn, it was also the ruler. This is really a time that facilitates for you, Pisces, maybe more than any other sign, more introspection, solitude, letting go. Also service, but because it's the 12th house is often quite confusing. We're not really sure how to work with that. It can be kind of confusing to us. So you need to be careful not to get into too much like escapism and be like, oh, I don't know what this kind of rumbling is here, but oh, I sense something, right? And instead, allow yourself to go into those realms that might feel a little confusing, but you're very naturally sympathetic and empathetic. And it can really bring out this hidden compassion and this hidden commitment that you have to, to stay engaged in the world. So that's Saturn in Aquarius for all 12 signs. Again, if you wanted to get a 30-minute tune-up here in early 2023, you can go to samsreadings.com and get a 30-minute reading. It's me just looking at your chart, talking about what's coming up for you, talking about what these transits mean. those Saturn aspects, other things, whatever's happening in your chart. I'll look at them. It's a good time to get reset because we have a lot of positive energy coming in here, and I'm sure you're going to want to know. And if you think that can help you, then please go ahead and do that.